The transport ship Galactic Harmony drifted silently through the void, its hull scarred from countless journeys across hostile space. Inside the cramped passenger bay, Maya Chun pressed her face against the small porthole, watching stars streak past like distant fireflies. At 19, she was young for an interstellar colonist, but old enough to understand that she might never see Earth again. "First time leaving the Sol system?" asked the Altarian sitting across from her. His blue-scaled skin shimmered under the artificial lights, and his 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of curiosity among his species. Maya nodded, pulling her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders. "Yeah, my family got selected for the Kepler 442b colony program. Agricultural specialists. They said we were needed." The Altarian's gill slits fluttered, their equivalent of a chuckle. "Kepler 442b? That's Deathworld territory, human. Are you sure you have the right coordinates?" Before Maya could respond, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "Attention passengers, we are experiencing unexpected engine failure. Emergency protocols are now in effect. Please remain calm and prepare for emergency landing procedures." The lights flickered, and the ship lurched violently to one side. Maya's stomach dropped as the artificial gravity fluctuated. Through the porthole, she could see they were approaching a planet, but it wasn't the green and blue world of Kepler 442b from the colony brochures. This planet was darker, covered in swirling storms and jagged mountain ranges that looked like the teeth of some massive beast. "Emergency landing on Vexhi Prime," the captain's voice announced, strain evident in his words. All passengers brace for impact. The Altarian's 4 eyes widened in terror. "Vexhi Prime? That's not a colony world. That's a hunting preserve. The Dominion uses it to test their apex predators." Maya gripped her seat as the ship began its violent descent through the planet's atmosphere. The hull groaned and sparked around them, and she could smell the acrid scent of burning electronics. Other passengers were screaming in various alien languages, but Maya found herself strangely calm. Growing up on the rough frontier colonies of Mars had taught her that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. The ship hit the ground with tremendous force, throwing Maya against the bulkhead. Metal screamed against rock, and then everything went silent except for the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the crackle of failing systems. Maya's head throbbed as she struggled to her feet. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow. She looked around the passenger bay and felt her heart sink. The Altarian who had been talking to her lay motionless, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. Of the 30 passengers who had boarded the ship, she could only see 5 others moving. Captain Zorith, a grizzled Centaurian with cybernetic implants covering half his face, was checking the other survivors. His expression was grim. "Structural damage is catastrophic," he reported to the group. "Communications are down, life support is failing, and the emergency beacon was destroyed in the crash." A female Thicarian with iridescent purple skin was cradling her injured arm. "How long before rescue?" she asked, her voice tight with pain. Zorith's silence was answer enough. "This is Vexhi Prime," explained Dr. Kess, an elderly Valdorian whose multiple tentacles were busy treating the wounded. "The Dominion's apex predator preserve. Ships avoid this system unless they're bringing new specimens for the hunting grounds." Maya helped bandage the injured Thicarian's arm as she processed this information. "So we're trapped on a planet full of monsters with no way to call for help." "That's about the size of it," Zorith confirmed. "Our best bet is to find the old research station. It's about 50 kilometers north of here, assuming my navigation systems aren't completely fried. If we're lucky, it still has working communications equipment." The 6th survivor, a young Nexan engineer named Pol, was already working on the ship's systems. His 6 arms moved with mechanical precision as he sorted through the wreckage. "I can maybe get us some portable equipment," he said, his translator rendering his chittering speech into standard. "Food synthesizers, basic shelter generators, maybe some defensive weapons." As if on cue, a low, rumbling roar echoed across the landscape outside. It was answered by another roar from a different direction, and then another. Maya felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Whatever made those sounds was big, and there were multiple creatures out there. "We need to move," Zorith said, checking his sidearm. "The crash site will attract scavengers first, then the real predators." They worked quickly to gather supplies. Pole managed to salvage several devices from the ship's emergency stores. A small shelter generator that could create a basic force field, portable food synthesizers, water purification tablets, and 3 plasma rifles with limited charge packs. As they prepared to leave, Maya noticed something the others had missed. A section of the ship's hull had been torn open not by the crash, but by something with claws. The metal was scored in parallel lines, each groove as wide as her finger. "Something's already been here," she said quietly, pointing out the claw marks. Dr. Kess examined the damage with his multiple eyes. "Raxian stalker, most likely. They're drawn to the scent of fresh metal and blood. We need to leave immediately." They set out into the alien wilderness as the planet's twin suns began to set, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Maya had never seen landscape quite like this. Twisted trees with black bark and silver leaves, crystalline formations that hummed with strange energy, and pools of what looked like liquid mercury scattered throughout the valleys. The group moved in single file, with Zorith taking point and Maya bringing up the rear. She had insisted on this position despite being the youngest and least experienced. "I grew up on Mars," she had explained. "I know how to watch for trouble." What she didn't tell them was that her enhanced genetics, a common modification for Mars colonists to help them survive the harsh environment, gave her better reflexes and sensory perception than baseline humans. Her parents had paid extra for the military-grade package, hoping it would give her an edge in the competitive colonial job market. As they walked, Dr. Kess provided a running commentary on the planet's ecosystem. Vexhi Prime was originally a Dominion military research world. He explained, his tentacles gesturing as he spoke. They bred and modified creatures from a dozen different worlds, trying to create the perfect biological weapons. When the project was abandoned 50 years ago, they just left everything here to evolve on its own. So the entire planet is basically one big genetic experiment? Maya asked, stepping carefully around a pool of suspicious-looking liquid. "Exactly, and we're the latest test subjects." They had been walking for about 2 hours when Pole suddenly stopped, his antennae twitching frantically. "Movement," he whispered. "Something big coming from the east." Zorith raised his hand for silence and activated his scanner. The device painted a 3-dimensional map of their surroundings in blue light, and Maya could see several large heat signatures approaching their position. "Pack hunters," the captain muttered. "Looks like umbral wolves. 6 of them, moving to surround us." Maya had read about umbral wolves in her xenobiology studies. They were originally from the shadow world of Nyx, bred for intelligence and pack coordination. Each one was the size of a small horse, with adaptive camouflage that made them nearly invisible in low light. "The shelter generator," Dr. Kess suggested. "We could create a defensive perimeter." "Won't work," Zorith replied. "The power cell would drain in minutes against sustained attack. We need to find better ground." Maya scanned their surroundings and spotted a cluster of tall, crystalline formations about 100 meters away. "There," she pointed. "The crystals. If we can get between them, they'll have to come at us from limited angles." They moved quickly but quietly toward the crystal formation. Maya could feel eyes watching them from the darkness, and once she thought she caught a glimpse of something large and gray moving between the twisted trees. They reached the crystals just as the first wolf attacked. It came from their blind side, moving with liquid grace despite its size. Zorith's plasma rifle discharged with a brilliant flash, but the bolt passed harmlessly through empty air. The wolf had changed direction mid-leap with impossible agility. Maya found herself acting on pure instinct. As the wolf landed and prepared for another attack. She grabbed a fist-sized chunk of crystal from the ground and hurled it with all her strength. The projectile caught the creature in the side of the head with a wet crack, and it stumbled backward with a surprised yelp. Nice throw, Pole chittered, but there was no time to celebrate. 5 more wolves emerged from the darkness, their eyes glowing like amber coals. The battle was brutal and chaotic. Zoratha's military training served him well, and he managed to drop one of the wolves with a well-placed plasma bolt. Dr. Kess used his medical scanner to confuse another by overloading its targeting with bright lights and high-frequency sounds. But it was Maya who surprised everyone, including herself. When one of the wolves broke through their defenses and went straight for the injured Thicarian, Maya didn't hesitate. She stepped directly into the creature's path, grabbed it by the throat with both hands, and used its own momentum to slam it into the crystalline wall behind her. The wolf was stunned, but not dead. As it struggled to regain its footing, Maya noticed something interesting. Its behavior had changed. Instead of immediately attacking again, it was studying her, its head tilted to one side like a curious dog. Acting on instinct, Maya made direct eye contact with the creature and let out a low, rumbling growl from deep in her throat. It was a sound she didn't know she could make, something primal that seemed to bypass her conscious mind entirely. The wolf's ears flattened against its skull, and it took a step backward. Then, to everyone's amazement, it lowered its head in what could only be described as a submissive gesture. The other wolves, seeing their packmate's reaction, stopped their attack and began backing away. Within moments, they had melted back into the shadows as silently as they had appeared. "How did you do that?" Dr. Kess asked, his multiple eyes wide with disbelief. Maya was breathing hard, adrenaline still coursing through her system. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "It just felt like the right thing to do." Zorath was scanning the area for more threats. "Whatever you did, it worked. But we shouldn't count on it happening again. Let's keep moving." They continued their trek through the alien night, but Maya noticed that the others were looking at her differently now. There was respect in their eyes, but also a hint of wariness. She had done something that shouldn't have been possible for a normal human. As they walked, Maya began to notice other things about herself. Her night vision seemed sharper than it should be, even with her genetic modifications. She could hear sounds that the others missed. The rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the distant calls of flying predators, the subtle shift in wind direction that preceded a change in weather. When they stopped to rest after several hours of walking, Dr. Kess approached her privately. "Your genetic modifications," he said quietly. "They're not standard colonial packages, are they?" Maya hesitated before answering. Her parents had made her promise never to discuss the details of her enhancement, but their current situation seemed to call for honesty. "My parents paid for something special," she admitted. "They never told me exactly what, but I know it involves some restricted technologies." Dr. Kess nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen similar enhancements before, during my time at the Terran Defense Corps. Experimental programs designed to create soldiers who could operate in any environment against any enemy." He paused, studying her with his multiple eyes. "What you did with that wolf, that wasn't learned behavior. That was genetic memory, activation of dormant predator instincts." The implications of his words sent a chill down Maya's spine. "You're saying I'm some kind of weapon?" "I'm saying you might be the key to our survival on this world," Dr. Kess replied. "But you need to be careful. Enhanced genetics can be unpredictable, especially under extreme stress. You might find yourself changing in ways you don't expect." They resumed their journey as the planet's twin suns began to rise, painting the landscape in shades of amber and red. The alien wilderness looked even more dangerous in daylight. Maya could see massive claw marks scored into tree trunks, areas where the ground had been torn up by enormous creatures, and strange organic structures that might have been nests or territorial markers. As they climbed a ridge that offered a view of the surrounding terrain, Zorath pointed toward the horizon. "There," he said, adjusting his scanner. "The research station." We should be able to reach it by nightfall if we maintain our current pace. Maya looked in the direction he indicated and saw what appeared to be a complex of low buildings built into the side of a mountain. Even from this distance, she could tell it was abandoned. No lights, no signs of activity, and several of the structures appear to be partially collapsed. Doesn't look very welcoming, Pole observed, his antennae twitching nervously. It doesn't have to be welcoming, Zorth replied. It just has to have working communications equipment. As they began their descent toward the valley floor, Maya noticed movement in the shadows below. Whatever was down, there was big, much bigger than the umbral wolves they had encountered the night before. We're not alone down there, she said, pointing toward the movement. Zorth activated his scanner and cursed in his native language. Apex predators, he announced grimly. 3 of them, and they're huge. Probably Vexi Titans, the planet's top predator. Dr. Kess consulted his datapad. According to the research files, Vexi Titans are intelligent pack hunters. They can grow up to 12 meters in length and are capable of basic tool use. The research station probably attracted them because it represents the largest artificial structure in their territory. So our only hope for rescue is guarded by 3 giant monsters, the Thicarian woman summarized. Perfect. Maya studied the valley below, her enhanced vision picking out details that the others missed. The Titans weren't just randomly wandering around the research station. They were patrolling it in a coordinated pattern, like guards protecting something valuable. They're not just territorial, she realized. They're protecting something specific inside the station. What makes you think that? Zorth asked. Maya pointed toward the creature's movement pattern. Look how they move. They're not covering the entire area randomly. They're focusing on 3 specific points. The main entrance, the communications tower, and that building on the eastern side. Dr. Kess studied the pattern and nodded slowly. She's right. This is protective behavior, not territorial marking. There must be something in those buildings that they consider valuable. The question is, Pole chittered nervously, how do we get past 3 apex predators to find out what it is? Maya was already forming a plan, though she wasn't sure the others would like it. Maybe we don't have to get past them, she said. Maybe we can work with them. The group stared at her in disbelief. You want to negotiate with giant predators? Zorth asked. These aren't domesticated animals, Maya. They're engineered killing machines. So were the umbral wolves, Maya pointed out. But they responded to the right approach. Dr. Kess was thoughtful. The research files do mention that Vexi Titans have complex social structures. It's theoretically possible that they might respond to appropriate dominance displays. Or they might just eat us, the Thicarian woman muttered. Maya looked down at the valley again, watching the massive creatures move with surprising grace between the abandoned buildings. Something deep in her genetic memory was stirring again, the same instinct that had helped her communicate with the wolves. I'll go down alone first, she decided. If something goes wrong, the rest of you can try to find another way around. Absolutely not, Zorth protested. I'm not sending a civilian down there as bait. I'm not bait, Maya replied firmly. I'm the only one who's managed to communicate with the local wildlife. If anyone has a chance of getting through to them, it's me. Before anyone could stop her, Maya began making her way down the slope toward the valley floor. Behind her, she could hear the others arguing in whispered voices, but she didn't turn back. She could feel something calling to her from the darkness below, something that promised answers to questions she hadn't known she was asking. As she approached the outer perimeter of the research station, the first Titan noticed her approach. It was even more massive than she had expected, a sleek, predatory form covered in scales that shifted color like living metal. Its head turned toward her with intelligent yellow eyes, and she could see rows of razor-sharp teeth as it opened its mouth to taste her scent. Maya stopped about 50 meters from the creature and forced herself to remain perfectly still. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she knew that running would trigger a chase response. Instead, she made direct eye contact with the Titan and waited. The creature studied her for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it made a sound, Not a roar or growl, but a complex series of clicks and whistles that seemed almost musical. To her amazement, Maya found herself understanding the sound on an instinctive level. It wasn't language exactly, but it conveyed meaning, curiosity, caution, and something that might have been recognition. Acting on pure instinct, Maya responded with her own series of sounds. Clicks made with her tongue, low humming tones from her throat, and subtle body movements that she somehow knew would convey peaceful intentions. The Titan's response was immediate and unexpected. It lowered its massive head almost to the ground in what could only be a gesture of respect, then stepped aside to reveal the path to the research station. Maya turned back toward the ridge where her companions were watching in stunned silence. She waved them down, and after a moment of hesitation, they began their descent. "How is this possible?" Dr. Kess whispered as they approached. "You're communicating with an apex predator like it's an old friend." "I don't know how," Maya admitted, "but I think they're trying to tell us something." The Titan that had first acknowledged her led them through the research station complex, past abandoned laboratories and dormant equipment bays. The other two Titans fell into flanking positions, not threatening but clearly protective. They were led to the central building, where the Titan stopped in front of a heavy door marked with Dominion military symbols. The creature looked at Maya expectantly, then at the door. "I think it wants us to go inside," Maya said. Zorith checked his scanner. The building is structurally sound, and there's still some power running to the interior systems. If there are working communications here, this is where they'd be. The door opened at Zorith's touch, revealing corridors lined with military-grade equipment and scientific apparatus. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim blue glow, and their footsteps echoed in the empty halls. They found what they were looking for in the Central Command Center, a fully functional communications array with enough power to send a distress signal across multiple star systems. But as Zorith began working on the equipment, Maya noticed something else. Scattered throughout the command center were data logs and research files, all dealing with the same subject, Project Genesis, a classified Dominion program designed to create the ultimate biological weapon. As Maya read through the files, she began to understand why the Titans had brought them here. The research station hadn't been abandoned because the project was a failure. It had been abandoned because the project was too successful. The scientists had succeeded in creating creatures capable of adapting to any environment, of learning and evolving at an accelerated rate. But they had also created something else, creatures capable of recognizing their own creators. "Maya," Dr. Kess said quietly, reading over her shoulder. "These genetic signatures in the project files, they match the enhancement package in your DNA." The implications hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't just enhanced, she was connected to this place, to these creatures, in ways she was only beginning to understand. The Titans hadn't brought them to the communications array by chance. They had been waiting for someone like her to return, someone who could bridge the gap between their world and the galaxy beyond. As Zorith established communication with a passing cargo ship and arranged for rescue, Maya stood at the window looking out at the alien landscape. The Titans were visible in the distance, moving with purpose through their domain. She was no longer the same frightened colonist who had crashed on this world. Something fundamental had changed in her, awakened by her encounter with the apex predators of Vexi Prime. And somehow, she knew this was only the beginning. The rescue ship Stellar Haven arrived 3 days later, its captain clearly reluctant to enter the atmosphere of Vexi Prime. Maya watched from the research station's observation deck as the sleek vessel descended through the storm clouds, escorted by 3 Vexi Titans who had taken it upon themselves to patrol the airspace around the landing zone. "I've never seen anything like it," Captain Thorne muttered as he emerged from his ship, eyeing the massive creatures warily. "Apex predators providing escort services? Are you sure they're not domesticated somehow?" "They're definitely not domesticated," Maya replied, approaching one of the Titans without fear. The creature lowered its head so she could touch the scales along its neck. a gesture that had become familiar over the past few days. But they're a lot more intelligent than anyone realized. During the 3 days they had waited for rescue, Maya had spent most of her time with the Titans, learning their complex communication system and beginning to understand the intricate social structure that governed their society. She had discovered that the creatures weren't just random predators left behind by failed experiments. They were the descendants of an entire ecosystem that had been designed to evolve together. The Titans were the apex predators, but beneath them was a hierarchy of hundreds of other species, all interconnected in ways that the original Dominion researchers had never fully understood. The planet wasn't a chaotic wilderness of monsters. It was a carefully balanced ecosystem where every creature had a role to play. The communication array is fully functional, Zorith reported to Captain Thorne. We've already transmitted the data from the Project Genesis files to the Colonial Authority. They're going to want a full debriefing. Captain Thorne nodded, but his attention was focused on Maya and the Titan she was communicating with. Dr. Chun, I've been ordered to transport you directly to the Colonial headquarters on Tau Ceti Prime. Apparently, your genetic profile has raised some significant concerns among the Medical Review Board. Maya felt a chill of apprehension. What kind of concerns? The kind that involve mandatory genetic testing and possible quarantine, Thorne replied. I'm sorry, but I have my orders. Before Maya could respond, the Titan beside her let out a low, rumbling sound that she had learned meant displeasure. The creature's scales shifted to a darker pattern, and its intelligent eyes fixed on Captain Thorne with unmistakable hostility. It's okay, Maya said quietly, placing her hand on the Titan's flank. They're not going to hurt me. But even as she said the words, she wasn't entirely sure they were true. The genetic modifications in her DNA were clearly more extensive than she had been told, and the authorities' reaction suggested that they considered her as much a potential threat as the creatures she could communicate with. The flight to Tau Ceti Prime took 2 weeks, during which Maya was kept in what Captain Thorne euphemistically called protective custody. She was given comfortable quarters and access to the ship's educational database, but she was not allowed to interact with the crew or send personal communications. During those 2 weeks, Maya used her access to the database to research everything she could find about Project Genesis and the Dominion's genetic modification programs. What she discovered made her increasingly uncomfortable about her own origins. Project Genesis had been more than just an attempt to create biological weapons. It had been an effort to bridge the gap between natural and artificial evolution, to create creatures that could adapt and evolve rather than being limited by traditional genetic constraints. The scientists had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. The creatures they created were not just physically superior to their base species. They were capable of limited genetic modification in response to environmental pressures. They could literally evolve within a single generation to meet new challenges. But the project had been shut down when the researchers realized they had lost control of their creations. The modified creatures were not only adapting to their environment, they were adapting to each other, forming complex relationships and social structures that transcended species barriers. The final research report, classified at the highest levels of Dominion security, had recommended immediate termination of all test subjects and destruction of all genetic samples. The fact that Vexhi Prime had been abandoned rather than sterilized suggested that even the Dominion military had been reluctant to face the creatures they had created. Maya's genetic profile showed markers that were identical to those found in the Genesis creatures. Someone had used the same techniques that created the apex predators of Vexhi Prime to modify her DNA before birth. When the ship finally docked at Tau Ceti Prime, Maya was immediately transferred to a high-security medical facility. The building was disguised as a routine colonial health center, but Maya could see the military guards at every entrance and the scanning equipment that was far too sophisticated for normal medical use. Dr. Helena Vasquez, the facility's chief genetic researcher, was waiting for Maya in the main examination room. She was a small woman with silver hair and tired eyes, and Maya could tell immediately that she was not entirely comfortable with the situation. Ms. Chun, Dr. Vasquez began, consulting a holographic display of Maya's genetic structure. I'm going to be direct with you. Your genetic modifications are unlike anything we've seen in civilian populations. They're consistent with highly classified military enhancement programs that were discontinued over 20 years ago. My parents never told me anything about military programs, Maya said. They said it was just standard colonial enhancement. Dr. Vasquez manipulated the hologram, highlighting specific sequences in Maya's DNA. These sequences here, they're identical to genetic patterns found in the Genesis Project files. Someone used Dominion military biotechnology to modify your genetics before birth. Maya stared at the swirling patterns of light that represented her own genetic code. So what does that make me? Some kind of a legal experiment? We don't know yet, Dr. Vasquez admitted. What we do know is that you've demonstrated abilities that shouldn't be possible with any known enhancement technology. Your ability to communicate with apex predators suggests that your modifications go far beyond simple physical enhancement. Over the next several days, Maya was subjected to a battery of tests that mapped every aspect of her genetics, physiology, and neural structure. The researchers were particularly interested in her brain patterns when exposed to recordings of various alien languages and communication systems. What they discovered was both fascinating and disturbing. Maya's neural pathways showed adaptations that allowed her to process and interpret nonverbal communication patterns at a subconscious level. She was literally wired to understand the emotional and social dynamics of other species, even though she had never encountered before. It's like you have a universal translator built into your nervous system, Dr. Vasquez explained during one of their sessions. But instead of translating words, you're translating intent, emotion, and social context. The implications were staggering. Maya wasn't just enhanced. She was designed to serve as a bridge between species, a living interface that could facilitate communication and understanding across the vast biological diversity of the galaxy. But the tests also revealed something else. The modifications in Maya's DNA were not stable. They were continuing to evolve, adapting, and changing in response to her experiences. Her encounter with the creatures of Vex High Prime had triggered a cascade of genetic changes that were still ongoing. You're not becoming less human, Dr. Vasquez assured her during one particularly difficult session. But you are becoming something more than baseline human. The question is whether we can predict and control these changes, or whether we're just going to have to adapt along with you. The answer came sooner than anyone expected. On Maya's 5th day at the facility, alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Emergency lockdown protocols activated, and Maya could hear the sound of weapons being readied in the corridors outside her room. Dr. Vasquez burst into Maya's quarters, her face pale with fear and excitement. Maya, you need to come with me right now. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention. They rushed through corridors filled with armed security personnel to the facility's main communication center. On the central display, Maya could see a fleet of unknown ships approaching Tau Ceti Prime's outer defense perimeter. They appeared 3 hours ago, explained Admiral Rodriguez, the system's defense coordinator. No response to any of our communication attempts, no identification signals, nothing. They're just sitting there at the edge of our sensor range. Maya studied the ships on the display. They were unlike any design she had seen before. Organic curves instead of angular military construction. Surfaces that seemed to shift and flow like living tissue. Have you tried nonverbal communication? Maya asked. Admiral Rodriguez looked confused. What do you mean? Light patterns, electromagnetic pulses, gravitational fluctuations, anything that doesn't rely on traditional language structures. Dr. Vasquez was already connecting the dots. You think they're related to the Genesis project somehow? Maya nodded, her enhanced senses picking up subtle patterns in the ship's positioning that reminded her of the Titan's patrol formations on Vex High Prime. I think they're looking for something. Or someone. Before anyone could stop her, Maya walked over to the communication console and began inputting a sequence of light pulses that mimicked the pattern she had used to communicate with the Vexi Titans. The sequence was transmitted through the station's main beacon, broadcasting across all frequencies toward the unknown fleet. The response was immediate. The alien ships began moving in perfect synchronization, approaching the planet in a formation that Maya recognized as a peaceful approach pattern from her time on Vexi Prime. "They're trying to communicate," Maya said, reading the subtle variations in their flight pattern. "They're asking for permission to approach, and they're specifically asking for me." Admiral Rodriguez was skeptical. "How could they possibly know you're here?" The answer came as the lead ship descended through the atmosphere, revealing details that made everyone in the room gasp. The vessel's hull was covered in scales that shifted color in complex patterns, and its overall design was clearly based on the same biological principles that governed the creatures of Vexi Prime. "They're not aliens," Maya realized. "They're the Genesis creatures. Somehow, some of them made it off Vexi Prime and into space." The ship landed in the facility's main courtyard, and Maya could see through the viewing ports that its crew was indeed composed of creatures that were clearly related to the Titans she had befriended. They were smaller and more humanoid in shape, but the same intelligent eyes and shifting scale patterns marked them as descendants of the Genesis Project. "Maya," Dr. Vasquez said quietly, "I think they've come for you." As Maya watched the alien, no, Genesis, delegation emerge from their ship, she felt something fundamental shifting inside her own genetics. Her body was responding to the presence of others like her, others who carried the same modified DNA that had been designed to bridge the gap between species. She wasn't alone anymore, and somehow she knew that this was exactly what the original Genesis project had been designed to achieve. Not the creation of weapons, but the evolution of an entirely new form of life that could unite the scattered species of the galaxy. The delegation consisted of 3 beings who walked upright like humans, but moved with the fluid grace of the Titans. Their leader was clearly female, with scales that shifted through patterns of blue and silver, and eyes that held depths of intelligence that rivaled any sentient species Maya had encountered. When the being spoke, it was in the same complex combination of sounds that Maya had learned on Vexi Prime. But now, with her genetic modifications continuing to evolve, Maya found she could understand not just the emotional content, but actual conceptual meaning. "Greetings, sister mine," the being said. "We have traveled far to find you. The great pattern has been incomplete without your presence." Maya responded instinctively in the same sound language, surprising herself with how naturally it came. "I'm honored by your arrival, but I don't understand what you mean by the great pattern." The being's scales shifted to patterns that Maya interpreted as amusement and patience. "You will understand soon. But first we must ask, will you come with us willingly, or must we demonstrate why you have no choice in the matter?" Before Maya could answer, Admiral Rodriguez stepped forward, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Ms. Chun is under the protection of the Colonial Authority. She's not going anywhere without proper diplomatic protocols." The Genesis being turned to regard the Admiral with what Maya could sense was mild irritation. Then it did something that changed everything. It began to glow. The bioluminescent patterns that spread across its scales were not random. They were forming complex geometric shapes that Maya recognized from her studies of quantum physics and interstellar navigation. The being was literally displaying star charts, technical specifications, and mathematical proofs with its own body. "Admiral Rodriguez," Dr. Vasquez whispered, reading the displayed information through her datapad's translation protocols. "They're showing us technological capabilities that are decades ahead of anything in the colonial database. Energy manipulation, faster-than-light travel, biological computing systems. This isn't just a diplomatic contact. This is a demonstration of power." Maya felt a surge of understanding as her genetic modifications responded to the display. She could read the patterns naturally now, without need for technological translation, and what she saw made her gasp. The Genesis beings hadn't just escaped from Vexi Prime. They had thrived. In the 20 years since the project's abandonment, they had developed technology that seamlessly blended biological and mechanical systems. Their ships weren't just organic in appearance. They were literally alive, grown rather than built. More importantly, they had encountered dozens of other species throughout the galaxy and had successfully integrated with many of them. The Genesis modifications weren't limited to human or Dominion genetics. They could adapt to and enhance any form of life. "You're not here to recruit me," Maya said, understanding flooding through her enhanced consciousness. "You're here because I'm the last piece of something you've been building." The Genesis leader's patterns shifted to what Maya now recognized as confirmation and anticipation. The Great Pattern requires representatives from all the original Genesis bloodlines. You carry the human-based modifications, but more importantly, you carry the bridge function, the ability to facilitate understanding between disparate consciousness types. "And if I refuse to come with you?" The being's patterns became gentle but implacable. "Sister mind, you have already felt the changes beginning within your genetics. Your modifications are not complete. They require integration with a larger pattern to reach their full expression. Without that integration, the changes will continue randomly, and your consciousness will eventually fragment under the strain." Dr. Vasquez was frantically consulting her medical scanners. "Maya, the genetic fluctuations we've been monitoring, they're accelerating. If what this being is saying is true, you might only have days before the modifications begin causing severe neural damage." Maya felt the truth of the statement in her own body. The changes that had begun on Vexi Prime were indeed accelerating, and she could sense that they required some form of stabilization that was beyond current colonial medical capabilities. But there was something else, something that the Genesis beings hadn't mentioned yet. As her own modifications continued to evolve, Maya was beginning to sense the presence of others like her scattered throughout the galaxy. The Genesis project hadn't been limited to a single research station. There were others out there, all carrying pieces of the same grand design. "How many others are there?" she asked. The Genesis leader's patterns became complex, showing what appeared to be a star map with dozens of highlighted systems. 147 confirmed survivors of various Genesis programs, representing 32 different base species. You're the only human-based survivor who carries the complete bridge function, but you're not the only bridge altogether. Maya realized she was looking at the outline of something unprecedented in galactic history, a network of beings designed from birth to facilitate understanding and cooperation between the countless species that populated the galaxy. Not through conquest or domination, but through genuine biological and psychological compatibility. And the alternative to joining you is death. Not death, the being corrected gently. Transformation into something uncontrolled and potentially dangerous. Your modifications were designed to work in harmony with others of similar enhancement. In isolation, they become chaotic. Maya looked around at the faces of the humans who had become important to her. Dar Vasquez, who had treated her with respect and honesty. Admiral Rodriguez, who was clearly struggling between his duty to protect her and his recognition that she might be beyond his ability to help, and the other researchers who had worked so hard to understand what she was becoming. "If I go with you, what happens to my connection to humanity?" "It grows stronger, not weaker," the Genesis leader replied. "The bridge function is not designed to separate you from your origins, but to allow you to serve as a permanent link between your species and the greater galactic community. Through you, humanity can become part of something larger without losing what makes it unique." Maya felt the decision crystallizing in her mind, driven partly by rational consideration and partly by genetic imperatives that she was only beginning to understand. Her modifications weren't just changing her body, they were changing her fundamental relationship to the concept of identity itself. She was becoming something new, something that belonged not to any single species, but to the spaces between species where understanding and cooperation became possible. "I'll go with you," she said finally. but I want to maintain contact with the colonial authority. If this great pattern of yours is really designed to benefit everyone, then it needs to include ongoing dialogue with unmodified humans. The Genesis leader's patterns shifted to what Maya interpreted as approval and satisfaction. Agreed. The pattern functions best when all voices are heard and respected. As Maya prepared to leave the only life she had ever known, she realized that her journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The frightened colonist who had crashed on Vexi Prime was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to understand her true purpose in the galaxy. She was no longer human in the traditional sense, but she was becoming something that might be far more important: a bridge between worlds, a translator of consciousness itself, and a living symbol of what cooperation rather than conquest could achieve among the stars. The Genesis ship Living Harmony was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. The corridors were not built, but grown, forming organic curves that responded to the presence of its occupants. The walls themselves were alive, capable of adjusting their luminosity, temperature, and even providing nutrients or medical treatment when needed. Maya's guide aboard the ship was the being who had led the diplomatic contact, HFY, as she was called in the Genesis sound language. Over the 3-day journey to their destination, HFY helped Maya understand the true scope of what the Genesis beings had accomplished in their 20 years of freedom. Each ship in our fleet is not just a vessel, HFY explained, her scales shifting through patterns that Maya was learning to read as easily as text. They are living ecosystems capable of supporting hundreds of different life forms while traveling between stars. We have integrated representatives from 47 different species into our communities. Maya watched through the ship's living viewports as they traveled through hyperspace, the cosmic energies creating patterns of light that the ship's biological systems translated into navigation data. How is that possible? Most species can't even share the same atmospheric requirements, let alone live in the same spaces. The bridge function, HFY replied, her patterns becoming complex with mathematical precision. Beings like yourself and the others we have found can literally adapt the biological and psychological requirements of different species to make coexistence possible. You don't just translate languages, you translate entire ways of being. As if to demonstrate this point, HFY led Maya to one of the ship's common areas, where Maya saw something that should have been impossible. Creatures from a dozen different evolutionary backgrounds were not just coexisting, but actively cooperating on what appeared to be a complex engineering project. There were silicon-based crystalline beings working alongside carbon-based organics, energy creatures that existed as patterns of controlled plasma collaborating with mechanical intelligences that had evolved from ancient computer systems. All of them were connected through a network of Genesis-modified individuals who served as living interfaces between radically different forms of consciousness. This is what the Great Pattern looks like in practice, HFY said. Not assimilation or conquest, but genuine cooperation based on understanding and mutual adaptation. Maya felt her own genetic modifications responding to the proximity of so many enhanced individuals. The chaotic changes that had been threatening to overwhelm her nervous system began to stabilize, falling into harmony with the larger network of consciousness that surrounded her. But she also felt something else, a growing awareness of the challenges that lay ahead. The Genesis beings had achieved something remarkable in their isolated communities, but the galaxy at large was still dominated by species that saw cooperation as weakness and diversity as a threat. The Dominion, Maya said, reading patterns of concern in HFY's display. They're not going to let this continue, are they? HFY's scales darkened to patterns Maya was learning to associate with serious danger. The Dominion has been hunting us for 20 years. They consider us a threat to their vision of galactic order, unity through conquest rather than cooperation through understanding. Their destination became clear as the ship dropped out of hyperspace near a system that didn't appear on any Colonial Authority star charts. 3 planets orbited a stable yellow sun, but Maya could see immediately that these worlds had been significantly modified from their original states. The first planet appeared to be entirely covered in what looked like living cities, organic structures that grew and adapted to their inhabitants rather than requiring the inhabitants to adapt to them. The second world showed signs of massive atmospheric engineering, with cloud patterns that suggested weather systems designed to support multiple different environmental requirements simultaneously. But it was the third planet that took Maya's breath away. From space, it looked almost like a living organism itself, covered in patterns of light that pulsed and shifted like the scales of a massive Genesis being. As they approached, Maya realized that the entire planetary surface was one integrated biological system designed to support and connect every form of life that had ever been brought there. "Welcome to Synthesis," SYTH Era announced, the first truly integrated world in galactic history. The landing process was unlike anything Maya had experienced. Instead of touching down on a landing pad, their ship merged directly with the planetary surface, becoming part of the living infrastructure that connected every aspect of the world's ecosystem. Maya emerged from the ship to find herself in a landscape that defied every assumption she had ever held about planetary development. Cities grew like forests, their structures adapting and changing based on the needs of their inhabitants. Transportation systems flowed like rivers, carrying beings of every conceivable form to destinations determined by collective intelligence that somehow managed to serve individual needs while maintaining planetary harmony. And everywhere she looked, Maya could see Genesis beings serving as living links between different communities, their enhanced genetics allowing them to facilitate understanding and cooperation between species that had never been able to coexist before. "How many people live here?" Maya asked, watching a group of energy beings phase through solid matter while sharing some kind of artistic expression with a collection of crystalline entities. "Approximately 400 million conscious individuals representing over 300 different species," SYTH Era replied. "And that number grows every year as we make contact with new forms of life and find ways to integrate them into the pattern." Maya was led to what SYTH Era called the Central Nexus, a vast organic structure at the planet's equator that served as both the governmental center and the focal point for the planetary consciousness. As they approached, Maya could feel her own genetic modifications resonating with the massive biological systems that managed the world's ecosystem. The interior of the Nexus was breathtaking, a spherical chamber hundreds of meters in diameter, with surfaces that displayed real-time information about every aspect of life on Synthesis. But the information wasn't presented as data streams or holographic displays. Instead, it was integrated into living patterns that could be read and understood by any form of consciousness, regardless of its original evolutionary background. At the center of the chamber floated a figure that Maya initially mistook for some kind of artwork. Then she realized that she was looking at the most highly evolved Genesis being she had yet encountered. Someone whose modifications had progressed so far that they were no longer recognizable as belonging to any original species. "Maya, Chin," the figure said, and its voice seemed to come from every surface in the chamber simultaneously. "We have been waiting for you." As Maya approached the figure, she felt her own consciousness expanding to accommodate new forms of awareness. The Genesis modifications in her DNA were responding to the presence of the fully integrated being, showing her glimpses of what she herself might become given time and proper development. "You are Kethera," Maya said, somehow knowing the being's name without being told. "The first Genesis bridge." "I was human once," Kethera confirmed, though that was many lifetimes ago. "Now I serve as the central coordinator for all Genesis communities throughout this sector of the galaxy." Through her expanding awareness, Maya could sense the true scope of what the Genesis beings had accomplished. Synthesis was not their only world. There were dozens of integrated communities scattered throughout the galaxy, all connected through a network of consciousness that allowed for instantaneous communication and coordination across vast distances. But she could also sense the growing threat that hung over all of them. The Dominion had not been idle during the years that the Genesis beings had been building their cooperative societies. They had been developing weapons and strategies specifically designed to destroy biological integration networks. "They're coming," Maya said, reading the patterns of concern that rippled through the Nexus's living systems. "The Dominion has found you." Cathera's form shifted, becoming more solid and recognizable as anticipation, and resolve crystallized in their consciousness. "Yes, our scouts report that a Dominion battle fleet has entered this system. They appear to be carrying weapons designed to disrupt biological networks, planet killers that would destroy not just our cities, but our entire integrated ecosystem." Maya felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. The Genesis beings had created something beautiful and unprecedented, worlds where every form of life could thrive and contribute to something greater than themselves. The idea that the Dominion would destroy it simply because it didn't fit their vision of order seemed not just wrong, but evil. "What can we do?" she asked. "We fight," Cathera replied simply. "But not in the way the Dominion expects. We show them that cooperation is not weakness, that diversity is not chaos, and that understanding is the greatest weapon in the universe." Maya felt her genetic modifications reaching a new level of integration as Cathera shared their plan through the direct consciousness link that connected all Genesis beings. It was audacious in its scope and brilliant in its simplicity. The Dominion fleet consisted of 5 massive battleships, each carrying enough firepower to sterilize a planet. They were crewed by soldiers who had been conditioned from birth to see any deviation from Dominion norms as a threat to be eliminated. They expected to find a collection of primitive communities that could be easily overwhelmed by superior technology and military discipline. Instead, they found themselves facing something they had no preparation for: an entire planetary consciousness that could adapt and respond to their tactics faster than their computers could calculate new strategies. Maya took her place in the planetary defense network, feeling her consciousness merge with the millions of other beings who called synthesis home. Through her bridge function, she could coordinate the responses of beings whose thought processes were so alien to each other that they should not have been able to communicate at all. When the Dominion fleet opened fire, their weapons encountered not fixed defensive installations, but a living system that could literally grow new defenses in real time. Energy shields that adapted to new frequencies, projectile barriers that learned from each impact, and communication systems that turned the Dominion's own coordination networks against them. But Maya's real contribution came when the Dominion commander made the decision to board the planet's surface with ground forces. Thousands of heavily armed soldiers descended toward what they expected to be helpless civilian populations. Instead, they found themselves facing Maya. She met the first wave of soldiers not as an enemy to be defeated, but as minds to be understood. Through her enhanced genetics, she could sense the fear and conditioning that drove them, the years of indoctrination that had convinced them that diversity was chaos and cooperation was weakness. And through the bridge function, she could show them something different. One by one, the Dominion soldiers found themselves experiencing consciousness from perspectives they had never imagined. Through Maya's genetic interface, they felt what it was like to be a crystalline being whose thoughts moved at the speed of light, an energy creature whose existence spanned multiple dimensions, a mechanical intelligence that had evolved beyond the need for physical form. The psychological impact was devastating to their ability to see these beings as enemies. How could you destroy something once you had experienced its unique perspective on existence? How could you eliminate diversity once you had felt the beauty and complexity it brought to the universe? Many of the soldiers simply laid down their weapons and asked to learn more. Others tried to retreat to their ships, but found their communication systems flooded with new forms of understanding that made their previous worldview impossible to maintain. Within hours, the entire Dominion invasion force had been transformed from conquerors into converts. Their genetic and cybernetic modifications adapted by Genesis biotechnology to allow them to experience the cooperative consciousness they had been sent to destroy. But Maya knew that this victory, remarkable as it was only the beginning. Word of what had happened at Synthesis would spread throughout the Dominion, and the response would be swift and brutal. Fleets would be dispatched with weapons designed specifically to prevent the kind of consciousness bridging that had turned their soldiers against them. "We can't keep defending ourselves like this," Maya said to Kethera as they coordinated the integration of the former Dominion soldiers into Synthesis Society. "Eventually, they'll develop weapons that can destroy us before we can convert their users. Then, we must take the initiative," Kethera replied. "The time for hiding in isolated communities is over. We must bring the great pattern to the galaxy as a whole." Maya felt her consciousness expanding again as Kethera shared their vision for the next phase of Genesis evolution. It would not be enough to create isolated havens of cooperation. They needed to transform the fundamental nature of galactic civilization itself. The plan was ambitious beyond anything Maya had imagined. Using the network of Genesis beings scattered throughout the galaxy, they would begin systematic contact with every major population center, every significant government, every influential organization that shaped interstellar society. But instead of approaching them as conquerors or even as diplomats, they would come as teachers, offering to share the consciousness-bridging technologies that could eliminate the misunderstanding and fear that drove most galactic conflicts. Maya's role in this plan was unique and crucial. As the only human-based Genesis being with the complete bridge function, she would serve as the primary interface with human populations throughout the galaxy. Through her, humanity could be introduced to the possibility of true cooperation with alien species, not through conquest or assimilation, but through genuine understanding and mutual adaptation. "Are you ready?" Kethera asked as Maya prepared to leave Synthesis aboard one of the Genesis fleet's most advanced vessels, a living ship that had been grown specifically to serve as a mobile embassy and consciousness-bridging facility. Maya looked out at the integrated world they had defended, watching beings of dozens of different species working together to repair the minimal damage caused by the Dominion attack. Children who were half energy and half matter played games with mechanical intelligences older than most civilizations. Artists whose medium was pure thought collaborated with scientists whose research spanned multiple dimensions. This was what the galaxy could become if the great pattern succeeded. Not a uniform empire where everyone thought and acted the same way, but a diverse community where every form of consciousness could contribute to something greater than the sum of its parts. "I'm ready," Maya said, feeling her genetic modifications settle into their final configuration. She was no longer the frightened colonist who had crashed on Vexi Prime, nor even the confused experimental subject who had been tested at the medical facility on Tau Ceti Prime. She was Maya Chun, Genesis Bridge, representative of humanity in the Great Pattern, and ambassador for a new form of galactic civilization based on understanding rather than conquest. As her ship departed Synthesis for the long journey to Earth and the heart of human space, Maya knew that she was carrying more than just a message of cooperation. She was carrying the future of every thinking being in the galaxy. A future where the phrase apex predator would no longer mean the creature that destroyed all others, but the intelligence that helped all others reach their full potential. The Deathworlder girl who had faced the apex predators of Vexi Prime had indeed emerged as their queen, not through conquest, but through understanding. And now she would teach the galaxy that true strength came not from being the most feared, but from being the most loved, the most trusted, and the most essential to the survival and growth of everyone around you. The Great Pattern was no longer just a dream shared among outcasts and experiments. It was about to become the new reality for every conscious being among the stars, and Maya-chan would be the bridge that made it possible.